My name is Nora Mulready and I am the founder of the Unfinished Revolution project. The Unfinished Revolution project takes the form of a series of short films looking explicitly at issues that are contentious, difficult to talk about, and have perhaps been shied away from by the political mainstream. To do this, we've brought together politicians, journalists, academics, campaigners, people with work and life experience in relation to the different topics that we're talking about. Today's film is exploring a very necessary topic. What is centrist politics? What are the politics of the progressive centre? To talk about this today, I have with me Chris Coghlan, who is a former diplomat and a founder of an NGO. I have Emily Benn, who is a former parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party. And I have Barbara Blake, who is a Labour councillor in London. So welcome all of you and thank you. What actually are the politics of the progressive centre? We hear an awful lot about, how many people are centrist now and all the rest of it. What does that actually mean? What should it mean?
I guess there are many different definitions of it, or everybody's got their own definition in some way. But for me, being in the centre or progressive politics is really about being idealistic in your values and pragmatic in your methods. So I believe passionately in the equality of all people, whoever you are and wherever you're from. But I founded an NGO in Africa because I believe in social justice on the basis of need, not nationality. But within that, we were pragmatic about how we would achieve social justice, and we looked for the best ideas that we could find anywhere. It doesn't matter what part of the political spectrum, frankly, but if there's evidence that they work and they are more effective than anything else at achieving for opportunity for all people, we should adopt them and use them. So
give us just because you mentioned your NGO, tell us a bit about, because I think that might give an example of what the type of politics you're talking about.
So the NGO, I founded an NGO called Grow Movement. Where that came from, when I was 18, I met a child in Mozambique who had lost his mother in the civil war there, and I felt a lot of empathy with him because I also lost my mother when I was a child, and that gave me sort of burning desire to go and do something about it. And I felt it was very unfair that as a child in Mozambique, you had very little opportunity to do anything about that. And what we do at Grow Movement is we train micro-entrepreneurs in Africa over the phone, over mobile phone, using volunteers anywhere in the world, in fact from 60 different countries, and that increases their sales, their profits, and that enables them to create jobs in their local communities. Right,
so it's actually using business in order to generate social justice.
Exactly. So it's fair, very well, sort of hybrid between I guess NGO charity type solutions, but also business as well.
Emily, I think actually that's a great place to start. So that marrying of political pragmatism and ideological values-based politics, often centrist. It's suggested that we have no values. That's the bit that's missing.
Which is ludicrous. I mean, putting your values into practice surely is the ultimate aim. And if you're not able to do that, I'm not really sure what use your values and principles are. Fighting is great, but delivering is something else. The other thing I'd say about centrist, progressive politics, it also matters how you do politics. Because the type of political discourse that we find ourselves in when you are just pitting people off against another, whatever issue it is, there is a wedge and you are determined to, and even when I would be very sympathetic to a cause, I do find sometimes the way it is done, deliberately antagonistic to other people, that's not how you bring people with you. When I was a parliamentary candidate, if I was knocking on a door and asking someone what their, who they wanted to vote for and try and persuade them to vote for me, if they had something that didn't sit well with me politically, I wouldn't just immediately tell them, well, you're wrong, you're stupid, you're just crazy. You have to enter a dialogue with them. And I, going back to the point about, working with business, I worked in investment banking for 6 years, which is, anathema to, apparently left and progressive politics. But A, if you don't understand it, you're not really going to understand how you can use it for the purposes that you want to. B, you have to learn how to, work and engage with people that have very different interests, views, even sometimes values. They're actually, people's values most people's values I don't think are that far away from each other. And the more you pit people off against each other, the harder it is to find any of the shared ground. So not only do we have to talk about what the actual policies and view of, progressive centrist politics, which has to be, economic efficiency married with giving everyone the opportunity to do well and a social enabling state that helps people get there, which is my kind of vision for what it's worth. You have to work with people along the way.
That, yes, I agree. We have to keep our eye as politicians and councillors on the wealth gap, the lives and the gap between rich and poor, and how poor people, the experience they have of the services that we provide as local councillors. But we also have to enable people to be able to create their wealth, to be able to have jobs and decent housing. And if someone, wants to buy a house or a flat, we as the council and as a centrist government should be providing those kind of opportunities.
So actually it's kind of reconceptualising, I mean, in a way, the kind of emergence of the concept of a progressive centre is allowing us to reconceptualise some of these issues. So, for example, if you're looking at housing provision, should councils only be providing council housing, or should they be looking at lots of different types of housing?
I wholly support councils building more properties, but do we want the big, huge council estates that were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s? Do we want estates that have mixed tenure, that you have a mixture of residents, that there are opportunities there, for people to have to rent somewhere, or to have a social housing, or to buy something, to buy something. And I think we need that debate with councils and with the government about, yes, I absolutely support councils building more houses, but what kind of houses and what kind of estates do we want them to be?
One of the key things for me about progressive centrist politics is you need to go around the country and you need to be saying, right, what industry will work here? What is the survivable, local economy here? How can you make sure, you go around to different parts of the country and they have been so abandoned. There's such high welfare bills in these places because people don't have jobs, people will become ill, there are serious mental health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like there's just... there is an abandonment, and you feel it. It's palpable when you go around the country and you see them, and see these places.
I think part of the problem with centrism is that certainly the Blair years those were the good times, and so it's easy to be pragmatic when there's a low cost to voters, because you don't have to say you need to put up taxes to fund any of this. Whereas where we are today, we're actually facing, I think, a series of catastrophic risks over the next few decades, of which obviously the left behind is a key one, but also climate change, and the world's looking a lot more dangerous. And that to try and address some of these issues, yes, you can come up with some clever market-based solutions to some of them, but ultimately it's going to cost more money than say during the Blair years, simply because the economy was larger and there was more economic growth back then. And
so people need to be prepared to make the argument.
People make, and a
both
sacrifice
to the left and the right, in different ways.
And so I think we're in a different paradigm now to where we were then. And take climate change, for example. The UN panel on climate change found that I think we need to cut emissions globally by 45% by 2030, which is just never going to happen on current levels of willingness of countries to act for that. So if we're to avoid that, the UK should be putting huge amounts of effort into decarbonising, which incidentally involves creating a whole load of new industries that we would be great in left behind areas anyway. But to have the political will and as a country to be prepared to make the sacrifice for that, it's not that different in my view, unfortunately, to during the First and Second World Wars, in terms of during the First and Second World Wars, we went through, society went through a profound level of change because the rich acknowledged that there was a war on that was threatening vitally threatening us as a country, and they made huge financial sacrifices, and they accept that as part of being patriotism. Now, we're not in that extreme situation right now, but we do need a level of sacrifice to our country as a whole, financial sacrifice, to put things back on the right track and decarbonise.
The point you made about, what industries, the other thing we haven't mentioned now is that, the nature of our workforce is changing because of automation, which is only going one way, and no one's talked about that. And there's got to be a great progressive argument as to how you tax changes to take into account for this. But your father was worked in the post office. You look in America, the number of people working in the post office has fallen by 1.5 million because of automation. So a dialogue with communities about cultural sensitivities that for too long people were too worried about.
Give us an example of that.
If I think about the first time I was a parliamentary candidate, we didn't really talk about immigration at all, really, in that first campaign that I was 3 years candidate, 2007, 2010, and then by 2015, because you hadn't, and then you have a Conservative government that makes this magic target about 100,000, which is, by the way, part of a great example of just stupid policy, because you can't really, they knew they couldn't have been met, so all you do is make people distrustful and less likely to believe. You make promises, utterly ridiculous. And then also a lot of people think, well, then that's the number that we've got to get to, without thinking about the other reasons of the people that you're not getting, and the needs of the economy and the needs of our public services, etc. So I saw that so much after that promise was made, and by the time I was a candidate the second time, but we hadn't had any discussion about it otherwise, so then people were wedded to this 100,000. So that's a first example. Part of the problem is, you have a Conservative manifesto commitment in 2017 about long-term social care. Now, you can argue that it was wrong in many ways, which I would, but, you immediately pounced on, and then that completely shuts down debate about the issue.
Since the financial crash in 2007, the gap, people saw it, and it was sold, certainly by the left, that it was these greedy bankers that were milking the system, and it was that, and secondly that it was the previous Labour government that had spent all the money on providing all these services, and we on the left never really. We used the bankers as the whipping post because of the crash, and we never really addressed the issue that it was a crisis of capitalism. It wasn't actually the fact that Labour had overspent on public services.
So people should have come out a bit more strongly in defending Labour's
come out stronger and defended the previous Labour government and its record.
What would your take be on that?
Well, massively, because when you got to the 2015, I saw that as a candidate. By the time I got to 2015, no one had really been defending the previous Labour government at all, and I would argue that the leadership in that interim 5 years didn't really do it either. Hard to campaign on your record if you've been trashing it yourself.
I feel like we're getting closer to that kind of idea, or with the rise of kind of political populism, extremism, etc. Are we moving further away from it? Are we losing this battle?
It's a great question. I think that centrism has been, or a lot of people perceive it as being discredited, or that it's failed in recent years, and that's driven people to, I guess, in their anger and their frustration with the lack of opportunity, to the hard left, or to
the rise of the far right.
Yeah, the rise of the far right, or the hard Brexiters, for example. There's some nationalisms that are starting to come back. I think we need to have a lot of humility that actually, in sort of some of our sort of passion for being internationalist and cosmopolitan, I think we neglected the left behind in our own country.
So who do you mean by the left behind? Let's define that a little bit.
So really simply, since 2002, the British economy is a third larger, but wages are the same. And so, the average person in the UK hasn't seen a pay rise for 17 years, yet highly skilled people living in cities have seen their incomes soar. And so, the majority of the country actually haven't experienced the fruits of economic growth. And because I think we've sort of been fixated on our internationalism, or we've forgotten our own communities.
When you say internationalism, are you looking at things, what are you talking about? Are you talking about free movement? Are you talking about...
Yeah, I think it's,
about?
free movement, for example, you know, if you believe in the equality of all people, like I do, it seems natural to support the idea of free movement, but then I think we've neglected the costs of immigration in terms of communities that have had their, sort of low-skilled workers that have experienced decline in their wages because they've got lower people willing to work for lower wages coming in and competing with them. And it's quite uncomfortable, although it seems against your values to oppose that as an internationalist. Actually, I think people have got a point around that.
Well, particularly if you're looking at places, and Emily, you probably can articulate this a bit more, but especially when you're looking at places around the country where you can see that actually the investment in education, you know, it didn't really reap great rewards for those communities. You know, industries were closed, jobs weren't replaced. You know, when you're looking at people who've become quite disempowered, communities have become, you know, both economically and socially and culturally disenfranchised, you can see where a lot of the tensions are coming from.
I look in Nottingham at the working class communities that used to have, working coal mines, Edwinstowe around there, that were nice places to live, that had pits that have all closed down. I mean, we can have a long talk about the miners' strikes and everything, and the Nottinghamshire miners. But certainly from the 70s onwards, people who lived in those villages were starting to earn a reasonable wage. My dad was a postman, but he was a civil servant. He had a secure job. You know, he could work overtime. There was plenty of overtime. My dad had a saying. My dad used to say, "I want to earn enough to pay my rent, have a few pints at the weekend. I don't want a penny more or a penny less. Oh, and to take my family to Skegness or Mablethorpe for a 2 weeks holiday." Now, that was what my father wanted. He wanted enough to live on, and to have a bit of comfort once a year.
And I think that resonates.
And I think that resonates because I think that has gone.
Yeah.
And as you say, we talk about in-work poverty.
Yeah.
But if you look at the traditional working class communities who feel that Labour has let them down, who feel that Labour no longer represents them, which is why we've seen the drift, I think is firstly because when we've had things like the financial crash, those communities have never had a voice, but they're the people who know that they've suffered. They're the ones who've seen their standard of living go down. Now, you know...
Let me bring Chris in.
Okay. I mean, the interesting thing with that is exactly, they're people like your father in those communities, they're the people who have been the losers from globalisation. And there's almost a certain irony that I guess many cosmopolitan or metropolitan liberal elite always look down on them for being, you know, the anti-immigrants or the nationalists today, whereas actually these are the people who've lost out. And I think whenever you're talking about globalisation, you need to mention, because they've lost out, that's also meant that hundreds of millions of people in developing countries have escaped from poverty. So globalisation actually been massively beneficial overall. But similarly, the high-earning, high-skilled labour force, who've also been massive winners, haven't acknowledged that cost. And in terms of what you do about it, it comes back to being pragmatic, because a lot of traditional liberalism is all about free markets, and actually all the evidence shows that people like those communities have lost out from it, and actually there are spaces for more state-led intervention to address those types of issues. And it's not true that countries have never got rich through state-led intervention. Absolutely, when you look at advanced economies, actually like the UK as a whole or the US, you generally need free market principles to generate economic growth, right, with the sort of high-tech industries, because the state isn't equipped to have knowledge of how they can adapt fast enough. But with more simpler technologies or technologies in place elsewhere, you can actually use a state-led approach. So South Korea went from having a GDP per head similar to Ghana in the 50s to being one of the richest countries in the world through a state-led national champions approach. They basically looked at what was happening elsewhere and it used the state to create clusters and support state-led industries to adapt that. And we could use a similar approach in left behind areas.
And if you look at somewhere like Tottenham, which is a wonderful borough, but that has high levels of worklessness, higher than I think the London and national average, even when times are good.
Right.
It still has high levels of unemployment. Now, these are the issues I think that certainly a local council has to address, that we need to look at that, and we need to get underneath the reasons. We need to understand why there are pockets of the country where there are high levels of mental health, where there are high levels of diabetes.
I worked in banking, and I am so passionately of the view that shareholder value maximisation, which is this view that the rewards have to go to shareholders at all costs. That means that workers are to be reduced as much as possible, their benefits are to be cut to the bone. You try every trick as you can to just value-mise your bottom line with no care about the cost to the communities. Has had tremendously negative impacts for communities. But who's talking about that?
When you say have had negative effect on the communities, can you just explain to
So if you're a company that's if you are a public company and you've got shareholders, at the moment the market rewards you, and because if CEOs are paid by share price movements, right? So you are massively incentivized to do things that will get your share price up quickly at any cost, really. And if you present results every 3 or 6 or 9 months, Chris worked in finance too, everyone cares about the results every 3 months. It's ridiculous short-term culture. I mean, it's completely ludicrous.
So you're saying that kind of stops people from really taking long-term views that
of
invest
communities.
In communities,
Exactly.
etc.
Exactly. Let's cut workers here, or let's do what some companies do, which is you build a warehouse which is supposed to create these new jobs. They are incredibly low paid. They are invariably by a third-party outsourced, wholesale outsourcing, with no opportunities for advancement.
If you want to have a functioning society, the higher paid need to acknowledge that they have an obligation to the lower paid in the country to try and put the social balance better. And if inequality is fine in a country, I believe, provided everyone's getting better off over the long run. And that manifested, well, it hasn't happened for 17 years. And I think because of that, fundamentally, that's why centrism or liberalism has failed. We need a reformed liberalism. We need to acknowledge that the sort of free market model has failed, which completely free market model. Obviously, it failed in the financial crash, but I think I'd go further, coming back to what Emily said, in terms of our whole attitude, in terms of social responsibility. It needs to be at the core of what we do.
The progressive centre should be at the forefront of these type of things, but politics hasn't caught up to what the real issues and the real divides are. Talk about trade union background. Trade unions now really, I think, should be helping people get on at work and training and skills. And given that everyone's going to have so many different careers in our new ageing population, you're not going to do the same job for 50 years anymore.
I think they're a great example of an institution that perhaps hasn't found its place in modern society. What should the role of trade unions be? Should they have a role? Should they be phased out, or should they have a bigger role? What's your take on that?
Well, absolutely. Trade unions, I think, do have still a very big role in people's working lives.
Do have or should have?
Well, do have and should have.
Okay.
I do feel that trade unions are not very good at actually getting out into the community. Mostly trade unions now, more or less, are active within the public sector, but have found it difficult to go out into the private sector. And there's absolutely no reason. I mean, somebody who works in the financial sector, they should know the benefits of joining a trade union and know why it's important to be a member of a trade union. And we need to do much more work around that, about making trade unions, I think, much more inclusive and and open for people to join. I think, as I've said, trade unions should be out in the community. People who do work but aren't a member of a trade union, perhaps because there's no trade union in their workplace, and it's quite difficult for people to know where to go if you work somewhere where you don't have an active trade union, but probably still need help and advice and support when there are difficulties. So I do think that there is a role.
I think we critically need a long-term vision for the country. I don't think anybody's really talking about that in any serious way in politics right now. There's this obsession with the short term, and that's fine during the good times, but we're in a very serious crisis, well, multiple crises as a country, and in fact as a world at the moment. So there's a desperate need for leadership and sadly, frankly, sacrifice as well to start addressing the long-term challenges that we face. We simply aren't.
Emily?
Be proud of the achievements made to date. Don't let people seduce you, the nostalgia that, blindfolds you to actually some of the reality of it. A relentless focus on the future. And, how many issues have we talked about that the Progressive Centre should be at the forefront of discussing, but no one is talking about them. So talk about the issues, and I wish, my God, I'm not saying that I have any of the answers, but I hope that we can at least start asking the right questions and come up with them, because, most people don't spend all their time worrying about the Progressive Centre up and down Britain, or should they? I'd be concerned if they did. But, a lot of people do think about what's going to go on in the future and their kids, and these are the type of issues that we should be confident in talking about with our values, and not be afraid to try and have a rational debate, and hope that in the end, other people come to the same conclusion too.
Barbara?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. Having the vision, I think having the conversation, I think getting out and talking to people and getting people involved and being excited. I can remember, all my life, there have been times in that, or a lot of times, when I've been very excited about policies that have come, or I've listened to a marvellous speech and I've been inspired by that. We seem to have lost that. And I think that we just need to, yes, we need to have the vision, but we need to have the conversation with people as well.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for taking part in the Unfinished Revolution project.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nora.